The Egyptian government has defended its human rights record at a United Nations review hearing this week, declaring that personal freedoms were among its prime concerns. Representatives from President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's government rejected the accusations of widespread repression of dissent after the army overthrew former elected President Mohamed Morsi. 7 human rights groups based in Egypt said they had decided not to take part in the UN review of the country's performance, saying they feared anyone who spoke against the Cairo authorities would face persecution back home. The Egyptian Revolutionary Council, which is a coalition of Egyptian citizens and movements abroad, accused the government of a systematic abuse of rights.
Under the guise of the war on terror, all liberties are subjugated. Egypt has become increasingly militarized. There is lack of respect for all human rights, and there is no rule of law to speak of. The judiciary has become a tool of the military.
Amir Badr, brother of Ahmed Badr, who was one of the hundreds killed in Cairo in the summer of 2013 at Rada al-Andamiyya, expressed that not a single investigation had taken place since.
There hasn't been a single investigation. There hasn't been a single arrest. And there hasn't been a single prosecution. A massacre of that size, one of the largest in modern history. And no one has paid the price. And then you want to come to the UPR and say we're on the path to democracy? Who are you kidding?
The UN Human Rights Council will issue a report on Egypt's review hearing later in the week with recommendations for any action. Egypt will have several weeks to say which of these it will accept.
Now joining me on the phone is Toby Cadman, who's an international lawyer who's been following the events there in Geneva and will be able to tell us a little more about the situation in Egypt. Toby, welcome to the programme. Now, you're part of that Revolutionary Council delegation that we saw there in the clip. What are you hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, good evening. That's right. I attended a number of meetings with the ERC and I spoke at 2 press conferences this week, one on Monday with the ERC and one yesterday, the Freedom and Justice Party. Trying to do to explain to listeners what the Universal Periodic Review is for and what can possibly be achieved. I think certainly in my presentation yesterday, I was encouraged by a very strong statement from the United Kingdom, which was unexpected. Of course, there were a number of strong statements from EU member states, Turkey in particular, also the situation in Egypt, as one would expect, countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And as you've heard, the report will be adopted on Friday. And really what we've been talking about this week is not just what happens during the UPR, but what happens afterwards. And what we've been trying to ensure is that there is greater attention. This is not legitimate actions being taken to combat war on terror. And we're talking about thousands of individuals who are in arbitrary detention, torture, mass disappearances, and then situations in Rada and more recently in Sinai. So really it's trying to get these member states to recognize this is not business as usual. This is not a democratic regime. This is a military regime which is suppressing the people.
Well, indeed. I mean, the Human Rights Watch has said that Egypt's undergone the biggest reverse in its human rights record in history, and that must be quite a big claim, knowing what it was like under the dictatorship of Hosni Mubarak. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I know. Certainly, one of the positions that I adopted was that the situation was under Mubarak. When we see laws criminalising NGOs for not registering, when we see laws putting civilian installations such as hospitals and schools under military rule, this is far worse than anything we've seen before in Egypt. The international community needs to wake up to that reality. This is not legit. And one of the concerns that we raise is that when the international community looks upon Sisi as a partner to deal with the situation in Gaza and Syria and Iraq, they can't just paper over these enormous cracks of injustice. And so we've been trying to get countries to recognise, by referring to many of the reports from Human Rights Watch and the International, getting them to see the scale of atrocities that are being committed on a daily basis.
Is there anything binding that can come out of this, Toby? Is there any teeth to this process?
Well, no. I mean, regrettably, not wishing to trivialise the whole process. You know, the EPO has often been compared to the Eurovision Song Contest of Human Rights Review, because there is bloc voting countries that support these countries that have no real respect for human rights. What we will see is a number of recommendations that are made. Egypt will have to we'll have to take those on board. I mean, they can't just ignore it. That they're at risk of facing diplomatic isolation if they do that. Egypt did as a PR for their own legitimacy. They are probably tougher review this has been. Their attention to the last quarters is indicative of how.
Well, I'm afraid we're losing the sound there, so we'll have to bring that report to an end, and indeed this part of the programme. But stay with us for the second part of the show, where we'll be taking a look at the tweets that you've been sending around about the headline news, as well as discussing whether or not Britain would become a safe haven for foreign criminals if it opts out of the European arrest warrant in a parliamentary vote next week. Stay with us for those items.